Well, it's done. I've done it. Finally. I wrote a book. Again. The first time in almost 2 years. When I finished the Throne of the Gods, book 5 of Raven Sun series, I thought I wouldn't come back to this universe for a while. For a long while. Yes. Carlton Ace 1 says we could always resort to carrier pigeon if technology continues to fail us. Carrier pigeon launch party? Yes. 2 thumbs up. We got to do it at some point. We got to figure out that technology. But I couldn't help myself, Lisa Parrott. I couldn't help myself. Well, but there's a story to it. And since I'm a story to it, plus 10 people that you all know, at least some of them. So let's go over some of the logistics. So, the Son of the Deathless is a sequel, sort of, to the Prince. It's free. It's free in ebook format for everybody. I wrote it as a gift. I felt like I owed a gift to all of my lovely patrons on Patreon and to my newsletter subscribers who have been sticking with me for a while and have not received any new stories from me in a long time. And there were good reasons for me not sending them stories. One of them was that I was commissioned to do this crazy 2.5 hour long classical music libretto with Benedict Sheehan, which some of you probably have heard of. It's called Akathist, and it's now the first edit of it is finished, and it's going to be coming out. It's going to be launching, rather premiering next year at some point in the first quarter or first half of 2023. That took a long time, even though the actual finished writing product wasn't that long. But there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of planning. There was a lot of thinking. Also, I started to try out different things. I wrote for the historical series based on the life of Princess Olga of Kiev. That short story ended up taking me months. It was an experiment in style. I'd never really written anything like it, and part of the reason for that was Paul Kingsnorth. It's his fault. Let's blame everything on Paul Kingsnorth. But I'll get to that in a bit. But that took me a long time, and I also got commissioned to write a short story, and it was the first time I was actually commissioned to do short fiction, which is pretty cool for this anthology, which is backwards. I don't know how to flip the camera. I'm not even going to try. It's called Althingi, the Crescent and the Northern Star. It's the story that I wrote is a historical, somewhat fantasy set in 10th century Rus. And then I started to write poetry too. And then other things happened, like I had my wife had a fourth baby, and COVID, things like this. So all of that to say that it was time for me to start writing something again connected to the larger universe of the Raven Sun series. So, but how did it actually happen? Well, that is the story I want to tell you all. But first, I want to ask you a question. So if I were to ask you, and some of you might know already the answer to this, but you're welcome to share your answer. If I were to ask you, this new story that I wrote, is it most based on Star Wars, or rather, was the idea inspired by Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or Narnia? What would you all think? And Lisa Parrott, I do not have time for everything. That's why I consistently overpromise and underdeliver. Everybody, do not do as I do. Do as I say, not as I do. All right, we have one vote for Lord of the Rings from John Simmons, one vote for Narnia from Seraphim. Sherry says Star Wars. Shorty Angel says Lord of the Rings. Narnia. That's cheating. Both Wars. We have 2 Star Wars. We have 2 Narnias. We have another for Lord of the Rings. Hello, Mark Jackson. Good to see you. All right, keep them coming. All 3, says John Simmons. John Simmons, you cheat. Another Lord of the Rings. Another Lord of the Rings. Samuel says Lord of the Rings. Surprised there aren't more Lord of the Rings, to be honest. Keep them coming. I'm going to go check that I haven't lost anybody on Facebook. Make sure that I send people over to the right place. Oh, man. Okay. Beautiful. All right, Lord of the Rings. I mean, larger Star Wars universe. I already voted. Yeah, Silouan. Silouan is smart. James Flame says Narnia, but with a question mark. James, be more assertive. Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I only gave you three, so let's see who actually wins. Narnia sounds strange enough to be true. It's really, Nathan, it's interesting because I like Narnia personally, but I prefer Lord of the Rings a lot. James, yes, good job. Three exclamation points. Uh, but books, I write more like C.S. Lewis than Spain says. All right, well, I will put you all out of your misery because more than enough more than enough suggestions here. It's actually Star Wars of all things. I did that. I should have actually specified. And if I was very specific, you probably would have um, guessed. Samuel says option four, Slavic fairy tales. Yes, obviously there as well. But you might be surprised. There's less of an actual Slavic fairy tale in this particular one than there are in some other things that I've. So, um, if you don't mind, I will tell you how this came about. So, um, in the excitement, initial, very misguided excitement that I had at the expansion of the Star Wars world when we found out that George Lucas finally was going to hand over the reins of Star Wars to someone else, and that someone else, who at that, by the way, Kathleen Kennedy, say what you want, was a member of Steven Spielberg's larger um, coterie. She was one of his producers. Her name is attached to a lot of very successful projects. So for all we could tell, uh, Lucas was handing it over to the right person. That's what made it so disappointing later on. So at that point, before episode 7, 8, and 9 came out, I was very excited. I was extremely um, hopeful about everything that was going to happen. Naturally, if you all know me, you know I am not hopeful anymore. But I'm so I hope would brush up on my lore. Evans wanted to say I wanted to say more than human by T Sturgeon. um, so I started to watch Clone Wars. Now, those of you who have not seen Clone Wars, I don't mean Gendy Tartakovsky shorts. I mean actual the movie show, not the first season, but everything after the first season. I actually watched Rebels first, and I liked it. And probably it was better that I watched Rebels um, before I watched Clone Wars because Rebels is not as good as Clone Wars. So it was a progression in terms of quality, and it made me really, really appreciate Clone Wars. Now, Clone Wars is one of the most brilliant, is probably one of the best TV shows ever made. I'm not even kidding. Clone Wars manages to do something that should be impossible. It takes a completely empty space between episodes 2 and 3, which shouldn't be an interesting uh, thing at all. There shouldn't be all. I mean, Clone Wars. Who cares? It's a bunch of clones fighting a bunch against a bunch of robots. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't work. It shouldn't be interesting. But inside there's this character development that happens with with Obi-Wan Kenobi and with Anakin, who's the most whiny, annoying person in the universe in the movies. Unfortunately, just wasn't direct, as we found out, as you will find out after a really wonderful book, Conquered the Universe. Lucas doesn't direct his actors. He stands behind a camera, hides behind it, and allows people to act. He doesn't direct them. Video is frozen. Oh dear. This is very sad. What to do? The internet's supposed to be working. It says everything's fine. It says the stream is okay. I'm quite disappointed. Oh well. Well, stick with me if you will, lovely people. I will give you the gift that at points. I don't know. It could just be that I have too many. Uh, It could be that I have too many browsers open. Let me see if I can fix that. Oopsie daisy. What's wonderful about Clone Wars is oh no, okay, that's not gonna work either. Is that it captures mhm, hold on. Oh, oh, sorry everybody. More problems. Okay, there we go. I can do this. It should start getting better right now. I've cut down all the uh, that should be coming in, so it should be better at this point. If you have to turn it, reload the page, do that. Oh, put that in. Luke inherited the Karen Force. John, it's good to see that you're in in a better mood these days. Okay, we're going to spend more time streaming because it's lovely. Anyway, the Clone Wars. What does the Clone Wars do that's so brilliant? Um, the Clone Wars captures the sense of a dying cult, a dying civilization in a very vivid way. Especially the perspective of the Jedi. Now, we all love the Jedi, but the Jedi can get a little bit annoying in the prequel in the prequel movies because they're stuffy. They're supposed to and all this stuff, and you want them to go out and actually do stuff, right? You want them to actually go and fight. So the introduction of people like cool Anakin and Ahsoka Tano really made you appreciate what was so cool about the Jedi as an order. Okay, it brought out the whole samurai element of it. It brought out the warrior element of it, all of the politics nonsense that it really does in kind of overwhelm um, the movies. Since there's that entry point of that young and that young Anjanu Ahsoka Tano, who admittedly was a little bit annoying at the beginning, but later on turns out to be a wonderful, wonderful character. You can appreciate the sadness of the collapse of this beautiful golden civilization around you. And one of the most brilliant things is that it's a point of view thing. Uh, it's because you as the viewer know that it's going to die, but the characters in there don't. So there's this wonderful dramatic irony where you can see things collapsing little bit by little bit, and you want it to stop, and you keep saying no, stop, stop, stop. But in the process of it, there's all these incredible human moments, especially with the clones. The clones, are they even people? No, except they are, and they're in unique personalities and individuals, and it really comes out beautifully in the series. When I watched the first episode of the Bad Batch, I had that nostalgia, that sense of loss so powerfully, especially during the execution of Order 66. It was just, I mean, this is a cartoon. I shouldn't be getting like teary eyed uh, from this, but it was so beautiful, and I think it helped that COVID was happening, and in a lot of ways, our Western civilization seems to be collapsing in on itself. And anybody who's reading Paul Kingsnorth's wonderful series, The Abbey of Misrule, will probably agree, or at least understand what I'm talking about. To see it happen dramatically in front of me, I thought, this is what I want to write. I want to write a fantasy version of the Clone Wars. Now that might seem silly because of course Star Wars is space fantasy, but I mean I want to write an epic, medieval style fantasy set in the same Russian or Slavic themed world of Raven Sun, but in so take the stuff that really works with the science fantasy, make it true fantasy, and really dig deep into it. John Simmons says the Clone Wars maximizes the archetypal patterns and emotional force of Star Wars better than the final trilogy. Oh yeah, absolutely, way better than the final trilogy. Final trilogy, they tried to go back into the archetypal storytelling with with the ninth film, but it really didn't work. There was way too many missed opportunities. I mean, ultimately, it was an enjoyable film for me, but I wouldn't watch it again. Um, so, but now the problem is, how do I do that? And that was where I was stuck for a long time. I had the sense that I mentioned a. It looks like I'm stable. YouTube is reconnecting. Wow, this is weird. Okay, I think I'm back. Good grief. And in the meantime, I did something silly. I commissioned a cover for a book I hadn't written. I wrote myself a blurb and I called it The Son of the Deathless. But there was no story to go with The Son of the Deathless. And the series is called Children of Vasilia. So I leaned into the kind of, well, this stuff is going to happen, in the future. So that's why it's Children of Vasilia, because it's the generations past. Son of the Deathless one is a character that keeps appearing at least as an archetype or as a villain type in the Raven Sun series. So I thought, well, the Son of the Deathless might be a cool idea. And in the meantime, uh, I've been listening to the Lord of Spirits podcast, and I keep thinking that, you know, having a villain who is not a villain, a hero, sorry, having a young hero who is the product of a nephilic ritual and is unwillingly so, and is rescued by a small group of um, ranger types and gets raised in the wilds near Vasilia, away from everybody, down in the deeps of the forest where there are many wild creatures and things are really odd, but he's protected. And he grows up in this setting where everybody wants him because he was the product of an nephilic ritual, but he doesn't know about it. But he's raised by the good guys, and he's raised in a good way, but he has these weird internal urges that are not all that good, and you can't understand why. Um, so that's an idea that was there too, but I didn't know what to do with that either. Maybe Son of the Deathless, and then maybe the Son of the Deathless is the product of a nephilic ritual. But how's this going to fit with Clone Wars? Not unlike Saul's son who becomes David's friend. Yeah, it's very much like reading about the rapid development that led to the age of the dreadnoughts. Something that captured the imagination of Maya Belt. Yeah, for sure. We're still talking about the Clone Wars, absolutely. So this is all rattling around in my head. In the meantime, stuff is happening in the world and around me, right? And you all know the pandemic really kind of was a opening, moment in which the world really revealed itself. And in the process of that, I had to really dig deep. I had to really focus in on what for me. I had to really start thinking about what I need to do with my life, not only in the near future, but possibly, you know, I got to figure stuff out. Slow, yes, it's like the bear cup that and couldn't stop himself. Exactly. Yeah. The Boys from Brazil deals with Hitler alone shows the similarities and differences. It's a compelling idea, right? If you're a child who has these internal urges that you can't understand because he's the product of something horrible, is that child redeemable? Not only that, but is that child capable of becoming a force for good, not simply uh, limit his forcefulness for the evil side? So, the process of COVID becoming COVID and everything going crazy, I got to know Paul Kingsnorth. And Paul Kingsnorth has this lovely course called Rewilding Your Words. I've talked to some of you about it before, especially my patrons. You will have heard about it. It's a wonderful course. It's a 3-day intensive where you actually don't do much writing of existing projects. What Paul does is he tries to open your perspective up to the idea that nature, as in the world outside of these walls, that thing that we don't really interact with all that often, has its own perspective, has its own voices, has its own life that we tend to ignore or dominate or misrepresent. And what if you, as writer, were to go into that nature and be in it and be with it and let it speak to you in its own way? Um, Very much the kind of thing that um, I imagine some of the desert fathers doing, whether it's in the desert of Egypt or it's in the northern desert of the deep Russian forests. They're communing with nature, seeing revel as it exists out in created things. Paul didn't call it that. Many of his students at that point weren't Christian. Most of them weren't, because his long-standing readership would have been from environmentalist writings. By the way, as an interesting thing, Paul is now redoing this course, for a specifically Orthodox audience, and we're going to be featuring it for a small group of pilot students this September and October, in St. Basil School of Writing, which is a project that I can talk about later if you're interested in. In the meantime, this course that I took, it it did an amazing thing because, okay, so I've been writing for a while now. Not consistently, not in large amounts. I'm not all that prolific, especially compared to some people who write a novel, every 2 weeks, things like this. But I was in a rut for a while. I didn't know what to write. I didn't really. I had a lot of ideas, but really sitting down and letting those ideas become something. If you don't write for a long time, those of you who are writers will understand this. It can take a while to get back into rhythm, into groove. So I was there. I was in a place where I didn't know what to do. I was afraid of sitting down in front of the blank page and writing things down. And there were plenty of excuses for me not to. Yeah, I could do all kinds of other things. Yeah, Carlos Castaneda. Yeah, I've heard about that book, Seraphim. It's the problem with that is that it really leans into kind of, as far as I can tell, like absorbing the power of nature for your own good. Like it's a nation nature aspect of there, but I could be wrong. Smiranda says, in The Great Divorce, the angel turns the lizard of bad urges into a stallion that takes the ghost to the mountain to have an alternate can be directed to the good. I certainly think so. Dramatically, how would that work, right? So that's an idea for the children of Vasilia, right? It's new agey, yeah, Seraphim, exactly. So here we are in this course, and I'm going outside to commune with trees and hug them, and talk to them, and things. And it might sound silly, except really it was incredible. It was really amazing. Now I live in a place where communing with nature is easy. Just go out, 5 minutes outside of your house, and you're in a grove filled with birches and alders and native spruce and things like this. Absolutely gorgeous. So in fact, there's plenty of trees in my backyard. There's 3 or 4 huge ancient maples. So what I did, I just went out and tried to quiet my mind and tried not to be distracted, and you know, hug trees. Sounds weird. I'm telling you, something really interesting happened. Just opening myself up to being in the natural world without any expectations of it, either as a person or as a writer. I started to um, write poetry. Started to write poetry, and I realized that I didn't have enough of a language to be able to really describe the natural world in the way that a good fantasy writer should. I have plenty of words. They come out in huge gouts of adjectives and adverbs that most of them need to be cut down. John says there's an Orthodox course given called Opening the Book of Nature. I'd love to hear about that. There's something to it. In any case, train for adventure racing. This might seem like it's not connected. The reasons. So the reason I started to train for adventure racing in the first place was because I during the darkest hours of COVID, I happened to watch a show on Amazon Prime called The World's Toughest Race, and it's one of these like amazing race type uh, reality shows. It's an actual. It's not staged or scripted. It's an actual race. It's in a sport that has existed for a while called adventure racing. Basically, a scavenger hunting out in the wild with a map, a compass, and a lot of endurance. This was something like 600 miles over the course of 10 days. People had to cover on boat, on foot, and on mountain bikes. And I was watching, and they climb cantilever up rock faces, swim with all their clothes, freezing cold mountain streams for like 8 miles at a time. It was crazy. I was watching this, and the first time ever, I thought, this is like why can't I do this? What's stopping me from doing this? It's a weird thought. I mean, I'm you know pretty active, but I've never been somebody to go out for days at a time into nature and sleep in tents and things like this. But for some reason, I started to think, why not? And then I had another thought. Well, being out there, given my experience with Paul Kingsnorth's course, this is how you learn how to be a writer. This is how you learn how to find the language of questing, is by being out and questing. Yeah, Tolkien never quested, and he wrote a wonderful quest novel. But I'm not Tolkien. Maybe this will help. So I started to do that. I started to go out, and I'm still training every day for at least an hour a day. Try not to take any listening devices with me. Go out there, run around, either on a bike or on foot or on kayak, and start noticing little details. And yes, absolutely. Where prose fail, poetry excels. Poetry captures the senses, the emotions. Well, and this is what I yes, not unlike Thoreau, but busier. This is what I noticed is that actually poetry is not a this should be obvious that anyone reads poetry, but I'm damn. It takes me a while. Poetry is not a surfeit of words, not excessive wordiness. It's the distillation of words into their absolute essence, and that's what I want to do in my fantasy writing. That's what I want to do because if you can describe a setting with the maximum economy of language so that people can really see and feel and be there, then you've done something that completely takes a person and sticks them into the world and doesn't let them out. This was further confirmed by in a few craft courses that I took. It became clear to me that most writers, especially self-taught ones, don't use all their senses when they're describing um, nature, when they're settings within their work. So, with all of this going in my head, I thought I'd like to write a story where the setting is a character. I'm reading widely. I stumble across a book by Juliet Marillier, who's a Kiwi writer. She's from New Zealand. She might be Australian, but she lives in New Zealand. And she wrote a novel. It's a second in a series called the Thorn Tower. I think. Let me just Tower of Thorns. It's part of a series of kind of fantasy mystery, but this particular novel, Tower of Thorns, is brilliant because what she does is she really uh, zeroes in on what she's good at as a writer, and that is taking a specific fairy tale, one specific fairy tale, and taking the bones of that fairy tale and expanding it outwards into a novel length piece. She did that with Daughter of the Forest, which is a wonderful book. Um, I do recommend it to readers with strong stomachs. There's one terrible rape scene in it, so you have to be careful to skip that if you can all help it because it doesn't really advance the plot at all. This novel, however, the Tower of Thorns, is a more recent one. It's beautiful, especially because it takes that architecture of a single fairy tale and expands it out into a larger world that is a fantasy world, not a fairy tale world. And this was a problem for me because I can't sometimes figure out what I'm writing. Am I writing epic fantasy like Tolkien, or am I writing something more fairy tale based, like Juliet Marillier? And I decided, you know what? Most people who read epic fantasy these days read books that are this fat. And to be honest, most of the stuff that sells in the epic fantasy genre, like go to the Amazon charts and pick out any book from the epic fantasy section. There's like John Wayne, is a good example, or even somebody like Miles Cameron, who whose series I like, the Red Knight series I like. John Simmons, I wouldn't mind reading Tower of Thorns. Actually, it's Juliet Marillier is a great author, so maybe. But the honest truth is that I actually don't like reading epic fantasy in its modern incarnation, and I don't like the classic epic fantasy people like Tad Williams. I like Tolkien. I like C.S. Lewis. I like mythic fiction that says something important about the world, that helps us see something deeper about our existence. And most of the epic fantasy that is sold as epic fantasy these days just doesn't do that. It's adventure fiction that has a lot of characters, has a lot of violence, has a lot of uh, happening that isn't all that interesting, at least to me. And so, what's capturing my interest is a kind of smaller, more intimate stories that might have epic themes, but the stuff that's happening is localized, it's rooted, it's small, it's in place. I thought, why not try that? Because that's not what the Song of the Siren was. The Song of the Siren started from a big theme idea. Out from there, it was like this. It was like totally out there, up in the clouds. You know, highfalutin ideas, la di da di da di da di da. A lot of people like it. It worked for that part of my life. Probably would have written totally differently now, as any writer will tell you. You look at your old stuff and say, "Yeah, I wouldn't do it that way." Um, so I wanted to try something the opposite way. I wanted to start from the roots. I wanted to start from the earth and work outwards. But how? What's the story? It's going to work. Well, in Paul King's North Course, as well as in the process of reading a wonderful book by um, McFarlane called Underlands, also a book I've mentioned. Um, oh, sorry, the comment here. So you want to write a saga in a way, transport us the reader into a different place rather than into a story. I also want to transport you into a story because I recognize not simply that a place can transfer you, but also a fairy tale, as fairy tale, has something that is uh, not epic, but universal in its appeal, without being epic, right? Because fairy tales aren't epic. Myths are, but fairy tales aren't, right? Point of view of soldiers versus other general headquarters. Yes, Seraphim. Exactly. Yeah. So instead of having the point of view of the prince and the king, and start with a 10-year-old boy. Why? Well, I don't know. It just popped in my head. That's how it worked. So this is finally all these ridiculous things. Oh yeah, I was talking about Robert Farley. There's a really cool section in the Underlands, which is a wonderful book. It talks about the mushrooms mycelium. Now, again, those of you who have followed me for a while are going to get sick of mushrooms, but I know about the mycelial network of in forests. How uh, how the mycelial network of mushrooms nurtures a forest in a way that is absolutely contrary to how the law of the survival of the fittest should work. It creates an ecosystem where everybody's helping each other survive in a way that's much more than it would seem. Simple old style Darwinian world. And I was fascinated by the idea of these massive networks of mushroom roots that connect the entire forest and without which the forest just wouldn't be able to survive. So I'm riding on my bike during one of my intense adventure race sessions, right? Russian DNA compels me to seek mushrooms. Yes, see, that's one of the things, if she loves mushrooms and I don't know how to find them. So this is another thing. Absolutely. So I'm riding on a bike, just thinking, how am I to do this for an idea, intimate setting with a rooted place that's also a fairy tale? How is this even gonna? How? So I'm like, okay, wait, I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing this like what I did the Song of the Seer. I'm starting off in big ideas, and I'm trying to create ideas that are theological, huge, and impossible to put into concrete things. Let's think about details. What was it about the clone effective? What is the detail that can be? What was it that caused the rot? Well, it was the forever war. The fact that both sides could endlessly manufacture soldiers, so that the war became this kind of cancer. Yeah, I am recording. Hopefully on my side there won't be lag. I don't know what's going on. I've turned off every single possible uh, source of internet. Sometimes it happens. Sorry, Nico. Anyway, it's the forever war. That's the thing that was the heart of the tension. Now, how do you create an army of ever regenerating warriors in a fan setting? Okay, would have to it might have something to do with because the mycelium is a never dying organism. Not reincarnation. No, not really. Okay. Now, I want to go there. Okay? It's I don't want to go to a place where you have reanimations like this. That gets into the kind of fantasy that it's ever present, the kind of necromantic that I really don't like. But what if they were a way? What if they were a kind of a race of warriors? It would be like the clones. They wouldn't be human. They would be zombie-like. Not in the sense of animated corpses, but in the sense of warriors that were maybe automata. Okay, maybe that would be better. Automata, like robots, but in a fantasy setting. So they don't have agency, but they have some form of consciousness. What if one of them woke up in the middle of it and started to be human? Because of course that not human person who realized that there was more to their existence than this forever war, and he could do it. Couldn't fight anymore, right? Yeah, Gestalt creatures. Yeah, Gestalt creatures. Now that's a big story, and it would fit. The Forever War itself would fit as a theme for a larger series. So how do you get to the prequel to that series? How do you get to the place that could create those warriors? Well, that had something to do with the mushroom mycelium network, and that's where I realized, okay, there has to be a place. This place is somehow by a power that brings the very network itself, the mushroom mycelium network, such as it is, to some form of unexpected station. Now, of course, it's alive. It always is, but the aliveness of it is in the interaction of natural forces and actually think about how it's going to protect the creatures that live in it. But what if it did? What if it woke up? What if it became sentient? What if it gathered a consciousness? And with the large Raven world, this could happen because you have things like living water. You have all kinds of, you know, wild magic that could actually make it work. Like Hugh of the Borg. Yes, yes, sir. Exactly. So I'm like, okay, how would this manifest itself? What would this place be? And who would be the mediator between humanity and this place? And it felt to me like I want to write a story about a boy, a small boy, 10 years old. This is new for me. I've never written from the perspective of a small child who is, canny beyond his years. It allows me also um, to dig into the reality of married and family life because naturally this kid is in a lot of ways a combination of all my boys. I have three boys. They're all at different ages. But it's an amazing thing how you're looking at an 8-year-old boy and listening to him talk about things like the war in Ukraine and how the awareness that these youths have is actually quite mature. So it made me feel like maybe this could be an interesting entry point, an interesting first perspective into a new story, into a new world where there's forever war going on. And of course, the forever war, on some sense, is going to be me working through the historical, cultural reality of what the internecine war of the Slavs is. Because what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now is what was going on in that same part of the world at a much larger scale now, of course, but in the early centuries of the history of the Rus, there was constant warfare between the cities, between brothers. It was one of the founding principles, for better or for worse, of the Russian state. It was a terrible, terrible reality against which the church constantly had to fight. And really, it was only through the spread of actually, it was only through the domination of the Mongols that it actually stopped. There's a lot going on in my head because of the reality of the war. There's a lot of stuff happening. I want to work through it creatively. I don't want to tell people what to think about the war. I want to figure out what the reality of this conflict is in a story sense. Not that I'm going to preach to people about it. That I want to figure it out historically, what it means to be a member of that culture, a member of that cultural tradition, a member of that rich 1,000-year one rivalry was resolved by a pair of holy fools. Well, no surprise to be holy fools in my story. And it's set up. We have this place, Eden. There's something going on we don't know at the beginning of the story. There's a 10-year-old boy who has a special connection with the land, and there's a forever war. that's the setup. Uh, and I'm going to now give you, lovely people, access to the story. So this link is to download the ebook version in any format you like in the comment section of this video. This link will only be active for 2 days. I'm giving it now because you're here, because I'm very grateful that you're here. Um, I'm going to make this free for everybody who wants it, but uh, it's going to cost people an email address, but not you all, because you're here, because you're partying with me, so to speak. Um, so get it without any attached. If you would hold on to the link for only yourselves and not, I'd be grateful. If you absolutely have to share it with somebody, I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to tell you not to force. But if you can spare, uh, if you can hold on to it for yourselves, that would be better. And then I'm going to start pushing it as a free line on my website. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a quick Kickstarter campaign for the first time in 4 years. Kickstarter was very successful. Was one of the reasons why I've never done another one, and because I forced my backers to wait a long time. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to what I'm as by the recommendations of Nico. Yes, there is a mailing list. You can find it on my website, nicholaskotar.com. There's a sign up link right the first thing that you see. So um yeah yes, the paperback. So paperback's not available. It's not. I want to fund it because we're gonna have to money into the production of it because we have to. There's only a cover ebook. There's for that, and use it as a pre-order mechanism. So you're the first to know about it. If you're interested in finding out when the Kickstarter launches, do sign up for my mailing list. They'll be the first. You can find that sign up on my website at nicholaskotar.com. So that's what I think is going to happen. Probably within the next few weeks, I'm going to quickly put a Kickstarter campaign together that's going to be small in its goals, meaning it's not gonna initially gonna ask for a lot of money. But if we fund quickly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add uh, stretch goals that are going to increase the possible versions of this story. Um, if you want to, that'll be a stretch goal. If you want an audiobook, that'll be a stretch goal. Also, if it for whatever reason very simple, I'll use it as an opportunity to fund hardcover and actual box sets in a box of Raven Sun. James is asking about the artwork. The cover artist is Stuart Beisch. Um, I'll write his name in the. He's an English designer, cover designer. He's absolutely wonderful. He's done work with people like John Carré and Stephen King. He used to be exclusively employed by the big publishers. Now he works for himself, makes a great business out of it. The Song of the Siren cover was his very first fantasy cover ever. I'm very proud of that, and it's a lovely cover, I think. And it does what it's supposed to. It attracts the eye. And recently, just out of curiosity, I sent it to a cover audit service. There's these people that were trying to sell a service, and they had a designer do audits for various independently published authors. And the designer who did the audit said, "I would never change this, not change this. It's a great cover." Definitely with the sign up, lots of interesting articles. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So yes, sign up on my newsletter. I don't spam you once every 2 weeks, and I share things that are interesting. So it's not just about my stuff. Yes, Constantine, I'd love to do hardcover versions. They are expensive. They are very expensive, and they're very fiddly. Because if you do hardcover through Amazon, it's a very early service. They're not very good. I have one hardcover available for the Song of the Siren, but I don't want to sell it until I either have my own web store or until I have the entire series in hardcover. And we haven't gotten to that point yet in my funding. So maybe. Oh, thank you. In a Certain Kingdom. Yes. That's my fairy tale podcast. Okay, let me just check that nobody has been leaving me questions in other places. If you all want to open up the floor for a little Q&A, I'll be here for a little bit more. Uh, my voice is still working for the most part, but it probably won't work forever. So, uh, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them. But let me just quickly check. Partially muted due to copyright match. Oh, I wonder if that's what it was. How interesting. Okay, comments. Oh, that's weird. Okay. Okay. Comments. Try Zoom. Yeah, well, I know. Cheers, English. Right. Sound is bad. Sound is bad. No questions. All right, good. All right, Safari, go away before this thing comes back. Okay, we have a hello, Pano. About modern fantasy novels, Nico says they're not even trying to follow Tolkien. Tolkien's works of the same kind as the Iliad. Modern fantasy is much like science fiction. Well, okay, so Nico, that's an interesting point. I think I may have mentioned that in one of my podcasts. So in the 90s, there was a movement of old time, like 70s and 80s science fiction writers. People like George R. R. Martin, by the way, who was originally known and originally well known within the publishing industry, within the community of published readers, as a smart sci-fi writer. Um, moved to en masse. There was that moved into fantasy fiction, but they came into fantasy with the same kind of mind and the same kind of tools that they used to write their fantasy, to write their science fiction books. Those tools primarily are how to build a fancy, unique, and complicated magic system. Why? Because that's the same thing as your technology, technological setup that you need for your sci-fi. So that became the go-to model for fantasy. That's not what Tolkien did at all. Tolkien didn't have a magic system, not really. But that became the thing to do. And since these writers were the ones that were churning out work that was good, it became dominant form. So yeah, and of course it's difficult to replicate what Tolkien did because Tolkien's work is a lifetime's worth of intense study. These are, I mean, obviously they're also a lot of them right, but they're not as invested in world building as Tolkien. John is happy with ebooks, and John, you will not then get a paperback. What's your advice for writing really short stories around the 5,000 word mark? Nathan, 5,000 words is actually not that short. It's fairly medium sized for a short story. What's my advice? Um, take a course from who write short fiction. That's what helped me. So the people I recommend is Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush. I've taken several courses with them. I'm probably going to take another one in person with them next January. Um, they're really good. They're really good at getting down to the brass tacks of how to do it. So that's what I would tell you. Would you allow for your fantasy world to be adapted to the screen? Pano, my Raven Sun series has an active Hollywood option at this moment. Yes, with a small with a small production company. Unfortunately, the industry is now not looking at anything Slavic, especially Russian related anymore. So there was, I think, my producers were trying to rebrand something that was specifically, which they could technically do because it's based on Kievan Rus, not Russia in its modern incarnation. The fairy tales, the epic poems are set in a half mythical place that's the center of contemporary Ukraine. It's of course the cradle of all East Slavic cultures, um, but Hollywood, for all of their virtue signaling, won't touch anything even Ukrainian right now. So I love paper because I can take it beyond the infrastructure supporting electronic devices, but I have the same problem. My shelves are full. So yeah, I agree. The problem is that for me, the problem is that I can't read in any format. But if I want a really deep, immersive experience, I need paper. There's something about the screen that just it doesn't allow for of an engagement with the story. I don't know why. I would like to know a little bit more about how you connected with nature in Paul Kingsnorth's course and how it changed your daily relationship with the natural world. Okay, well, yeah, I mean it's very personal, right? So I was having a family some personal and family issues during that time. Had to do partially had to do with COVID, a lot of things, just life and family. These things are difficult. It was the quietness and the stillness and the forcing myself to not be in here, extending my um, allowing myself to be in the presence of the natural world, attentive to what it is. It's so strange that it's difficult for me to articulate this because so much of the language of this has been appropriated by new age kind of thinking, which is magical thinking, which is pagan, neo-pagan for the most part. And I don't want the wrong impression of what I was sensing. There is this the modern move towards animism at its heart for the really sincere ones is a very natural move towards reconnecting with the sense of the creator's energy in the creator. This is there's nothing weird about me saying that. That's a very traditional ancient way of expressing it that you would find it in a lot of ancient authors. Um, so for me, it was reconnecting with what the world actually is and forcing myself to realize that I had become almost completely, I had started to exist almost completely in an artificial reality. And practically what it meant was it literally meant me going outside without any intent, without any reason to, not for exercise, not to get a specific kind of feeling or a inspiration to write things like this, right? Just to go outside, just to be in a place to touch something that is living, right? Exit the matrix, John. Yes, it was insane. I could almost feel the molecules moving in the tree bark. It was crazy. Sounds very strange, but it was just me slowing down. And very intense. So it's not that I try to recreate that experience. It's not about the experience, right? Because that's then you can get into weird and dangerous kinds of things. It's simply being present, attentive in the moment, and I do it with prayer. I do it with prayer. Yeah, it's an intimacy of the Logi, the uncreated energies underlying creation. Yeah, very intense. Well, there was no tent involved, John Simmons, and I still have not yet slept in a tent in 25 years. A tent in my backyard. It's waiting for me, not yet. I will do it. We're getting there. So far, most of hours running like a crazy person straight uh, in the wild, but actually sleeping. Sarah is about me mentioning, of course, the course is St. Basil's School of Creative Writing, online school, year-long program for intermediate, sort of high beginner, low intermediate fiction writers to take over the course of a single calendar year. We have a full docket already. We're starting with an in-person retreat in upstate New York next week, August 22nd. We have 15 students in this first year. I'm going to be the one hosting the in-person retreat, but there are 5 teachers over the course of the year. Paul Kingsnorth is starting us out with his new version of Rewilding Your Words. Then I'll be teaching a intermediate craft course on the craft of writing fiction. Then Jonathan Peugeot will do a mini course on how to build a world in your writing. Then Catherine Hyde will do a self-editing course and a self-editing mini course and a mini course on how to create memorable writers. Catherine Hyde is a wonderful writer, by the way. If you all have not read her stuff, very good. And then we'll finish with Nicole Rokas, who's a Canadian podcaster, blogger, who is a certified trauma counselor, and she's going to be giving a very interesting course on how to integrate writing into your spiritual life and back and forth. Like how do you manage a spiritual life and a creative life in a integrated way. It's closed for this year. Admission is closed for this year, but we will be opening it probably sometime in February of next year. So keep an eye out if you're interested. I think it's going to be an incredible course. I'm going to be sitting in on the classes of all of my fellow teachers, so I'm just as excited as some of the students are. Like Konstantin Levin searching for his purpose in life. In a way, yeah, I wasn't in him, someone else, or rather someone else. Notice there was a lot of uh, nature touching Levin as well. Yeah. Well, I've been at this for an hour. This is great. Let's sit around for a little bit more, see if there's any more questions. But do download your free copy at some point. I will share it again in case you didn't get it, and I will also be sharing this same link with my uh, Patreon supporters, newsletter followers. So if you don't get it here, you will get it later. So Elise, I contacted the Hag. I called the Hag. I have the transcript of the call here. I'm not sure you want to hear this. So, for those who don't know, I warned my patrons that Baba Yaga herself might come. She came to a previous event that I did, and it was quite rude and horrible. And I told her never to come back. But there was some desire amongst some of my readers and supporters to have a repeat visit. So I called her, and here's the transcript right here of this phone call. I said, "Hello, Hag. How are you?" She said, "That's actually pretty good for her." So, Hag, I said, um, "Would you like to come to a little event I'm hosting today? There are some people that like to see you, and I don't know why, but they seem to like you for some reason." The Hag goes, "Ugh." That's a little better, right? Um, so I had to explain. I wrote this book and I'm launching it, and I'd like you to I sent you a copy already. I'd like you to tell people what you thought about it. And that's am I in it? I'm sorry, I couldn't. You're gonna be is not a problem. The new series. You're the group. If I'm not there, I'm not. She hung up on me. So I believe I'm saying no, Hag. I apologize. Pano says there's a lot of hyper hesychasts, if you will, who will have an aversion to using imagination. Frog5 says, "What is this channel about?" Hi, Frog. I am a Nicholas Kotar, a fantasy writer. I am launching my book today, The Son of the Deathless. Look up in the comments to see what's going on there. You can download a free copy of it if you like. Six Ecumenical Council, arguably a lot, yes. Well, if someone were to come in at the last minute and look at the comment section over the last 5-10 minutes, you would know that this was a channel talking about fantasy novels. But anyway, yes, it's about writing in fantasy, fairy tales, and Christianity, and a lot of other things like sentient mushrooms. Yes, Elise, I'm sorry. I'll have to work on convincing her a little bit more next time. It was a busy week, I gotta say. Maybe I'll send her something, something delicious to sweeten her tooth. Although, she does have odd tastes and her palate is a little bit rough, as you know. So, those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Hag is a character in my Raven Sun series. She is based on the popular fairy tale character Baba Yaga, fairy tales. And she was one of her characters to write. So, fortunately, she couldn't come. She was not happy to not include her in my latest book. I really tried. I really did, but she doesn't fit. She's too funny. For all his paganism, John says, I really liked Avatar. Really? Yeah, I don't know. It left me cold. I saw it in 3D. Frog, you're not going to be asked for money at some point. No, no, no. This is a lunch party. Anybody who's here gets the book for free. So enjoy. There are no more questions. I'm going to be closing down this Q&A session. Let me just double, triple check that nobody is still on Patreon leaving me comments there. And thank you all for coming. I'm sorry I blabbed as usual. That's the way it is. I can talk a lot about being somebody who wants to learn economy. There's still much to be learned. Let's be honest. Needs to be a world building class to not limiting culinary reference to stew and eel pies. Fantasy cookbook. So, yes. Anybody want to go in with me and do that? That'll be fun. Yes. So let people know the book's available. Send them to my website. They can get it there. Right. All of you get it free from the link that I shared. But everybody you tell to go find it, send them to my website. And yeah. All right. Sorry. One more last check. Nina Rohr needs paperback. Nothing like holding paper, turning pages, and the smell of a book. Okay, Nina, you got it. I will do it. Solo1 says my Patreon stream seems better than YouTube app. Yeah, well, what can you do? Okay, everybody, I think that's it. If that's the last question. Miranda, good to see you. By the way, we had people, just as a final, we had people from almost every continent except Antarctica and maybe Asia. But this was exciting, so thank you all. It was lovely. And yeah, I know, Frog, it's a bad signal. I know. We do these kinds of live streams every once in a while on my Patreon. Go check it out if you like. Some of you already have. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, James. You guys are the best. Thank you for contributing. The rest of you, thanks for coming. Enjoy the book. I appreciate it. There'll be more blabbing in the future. Take it easy, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.